So here we are in the sanctuary, and I want to show you a few things that always stick out to me here in the sanctuary, beginning with the plaque to Paul Gannett Osborne. So Paul Gannett Osborne was the first American to be killed in World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars. And interestingly, two historical connections beyond that Paul Gannett Osborne was a member of the congregation. One is his relationship to William Channing Gannett, the great Unitarian minister, and two is the outcome of World War I was a significant one on Unitarianism and Universalism, in that a response at the end of the war was in 1933 the Humanist Manifesto that created really the much more humanistically orientation of both Unitarianism and Universalism since that time. On the opposite wall from our war hero from World War I is our peace site plaque. Our congregation voted to dedicate our space as a peace site on May the 27th, 1984, and it has been since. This was made by a local artist who was the clerk of Montclair Township for many years. So our congregation has a 118-year history of dedication to social justice kinds of issues. But in 1984, that justice took on peace as a major element, and so has informed the congregation ever since then about who we are when our nation is in conflict. Also who we are in terms of the way that we are civil with one another and with those around us. Early in my tenure year here, we had a renter who rented our Fletcher Hall and was a karate teacher, and we learned that he used mock guns as part of his class, and guns are one of the things that in the peace site are not allowable. And when we were unable to back down from that position because of our values, he then had to leave. And so we've paid for this value in a number of different ways. As we walk through the sanctuary, we see how beautiful it is. For over 100 years, this space was, while it was beautiful, was all white with heavy, dark lacquered wood that got darker and darker through the decades as new coats of varnish was put on it. And back 8 years ago, Karen Nielsen-Fried and David Lewis engaged an architectural designer who came in and really picked up on the Frank Lloyd Wright aspect of this arts and crafts design and came up with this beautiful, beautiful way of presenting our sacred space that we worship in. I don't know how well they'll come out on the video, but you might see the tie rods that span from side to side here. Back in 1917, when the fire occurred and the timbers came falling down and charred the floor, and the roof was totally gone, the walls of the sanctuary began to spread out because there was nothing to hold them in place. And so before they could rebuild the roof, they had to pull the walls back together. And so they drilled through these timbers, and it looks like these bars stop where you see them go into the wood, but actually they continue on more than 3 feet to the exterior of the building where there's a plate, and they actually pulled the walls back together with those bars, those tie rods, and the plates on the outside, and they continue to hold the structure solid even with the roof on it. Probably more so because the reason that the roof burned off was that it was a cedar shingle roof, and now it's a very heavy clay tile roof, and so there's an awful lot of weight that's being supported up there by these walls. The beauty of this space, going back to the design, came about. Janice Maffei was our president. Nancy Felix and Chris Corbett and I met as the co-conspirators in developing a plan for a capital campaign. We met for about a year, and then the campaign was underway with a large crew of people participating in it. So here we are in the chancel area of the sanctuary. And well, let's start with the pulpit. I get into the pulpit on Sunday mornings, and on Sundays where there's something particularly weighty perhaps going on, or something of a historical nature, I personally invoke the memories of Edgar Weirs and of Norman Fletcher and of Lee Barker, who is still with us, by the way. Norman and Edgar are gone, but Lee is still with us as president of Meadville Lombard. But I invoke the spirit and the memory of those predecessors of mine before stepping into the pulpit. One of the things when I first arrived here is that there's actually a very small desk for the papers underneath here. It's only large enough for just an 8.5 by 11 with a little bit of extra space. So the first thing I did when I came was I built this new desktop to put over the old one, and I built it from some leftover wood that I re-topped my office desk at home with. So I would work on my sermons there on that piece of oak and bring it here to more of the oak from the same cut. The gong that we use to begin and end each service is actually has an interesting story as well. I originally had a set of chimes that was a gift that was given to me when I was ordained, and over the early years here, those chimes were knocked over so many times and became so broken, and eventually there wasn't enough left to ring them, and the last person to break them, I'll leave his name out of this, but he wanted to take responsibility for it, so he found a place down in Kentucky that would fix it, and we sent it down there, and after we sent it, the artisan who did it moved from one studio to another and lost the chimes altogether, so we replaced it with the singing bowl, and it's been here ever since. Here's the beautiful chancel. You know, a story that I would like to share, especially because it's important right now, is that long time member Malcolm Campbell of our congregation was such a generous donor for so many different things in the congregation. And after we did the work on the room, what we found was that the upper area of the chancel was so noisy when people walked across it that we needed a piece of carpet for it, and we wanted to match the carpeting that we'd put in the rest of the sanctuary. And so I went to Malcolm and I asked him if he would be willing to make a donation to cover the cost of the carpet. And Malcolm's response is, well, I'd rather do something that would help people. And it was only when I convinced him that it would be helpful to people that he said, okay, then I'm happy to pay for the carpet, which was not an inexpensive item by any means. Oh, another little story. We have the drop screen here that we use in every service. When we had the capital campaign, one of the areas where we got a little bit tight in expending money was on the screen, and we bought a screen that took 2 people about an hour to set up and to set down, and so it became impractical to use that during the service because we didn't want to block this beautiful space. And so I asked if we might be able to get a drop screen, and it just did not fit into the financial needs of the congregation at the time. So after a little bit, I thought, well, we need a drop screen, so I'll pay for it. So I went ahead and bought it, and I hung it up there, and two things happened. One was I was approached and said, now, we can't actually leave it there. We'll have to find some permanent way of hanging it. And I said, absolutely, that's fine. You can hang it however you'd like, whenever you want. And so it's still in the original place where it was hung. And not too many months after we put it up, the board came to me and said, yes, you were right. We needed to have a drop screen. We're delighted to have it. And they paid back the money that I had spent on the drop screen. So this space altogether in this room is a space that is sacred to the congregation because it's where we come together for worship. It's where, whatever we do, wherever we are, it's about finding and making meaning in our lives and in the world around us. But this room is one that we come together in, especially for that purpose. But this room is used for many other purposes. One of the ways that we find and make meaning as a congregation is by finding and making meaning in the larger community. And so we open our space for uses by many different groups within the community, so that on a Friday night, we might have Outpost in the Burbs here, and we've had so many different performers. A couple of times, the congregation itself brought Richie Havens in, and we had fundraisers that Richie starred in. So we have Outpost in the Burbs, we have Blue Wave that comes in and meets here. When the marriage equality movement was alive and going, Garden State Equality was a group that held many meetings here. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had an opera in here with over 70 members in the opera company, and the cast and the orchestra fit in, and still there was room for 180 members of the audience. Last week we had our sixth annual concert for Haiti, and there are so many groups that come in, and we want our space to be available for those purposes, because we want to be a place for the community to be at home in, and for the community to come together to create stronger and better community. So we might want to spend just a second here in the room that is known only as the minister's study, although there are other things that happen here as well. Leslie Traywin, who is the daughter of Don and Mara Lee Traywin, grew up in this congregation. Leslie's a little younger than I am, but not all that much. Uses this room as a room where she sees therapy patients as well. And so we have some Don Traywin artwork that's in here. But this was the office for both Edgar Weirs and for Norman Fletcher. And the legend is that, the legend which I believe to be a very true story, is that the building that's outside of here did not exist at the time that this was Edgar's office. And the view was clear across the street to the playground where the children would gather, and it was looking out of this window, first of all, that Norman had the inspiration that the playground was needed altogether, because the kids were just out there playing. But then it was years later when he was looking out on that playground and saw many African American children that were playing with white kids there, and realized that if we wanted to integrate our congregation, a way of doing that would be to invite those children of color to be a part of our programs here. And so looking out the window, he had that wonderful idea. He walked over, he invited the kids to come into the congregation for our religious education, and of course those parents of those kids were not going to allow them to come without coming as well. And so this congregation was integrated in Montclair decades before other congregations even began to think about the value of integration. When we had our capital campaign, one of the large goals of the campaign was to become much more accessible. And so this elevator that goes up and down these 5 stairs was put in place. We've had some challenges with it over the years, but it really has made our facilities much more accessible, and there are a number of people who appreciate its being here, and I think as a result of that, the congregation appreciates its being here, because we're not being exclusive based on accessibility needs. You might say that this is a room that represents where this congregation began. So here we are in the Alliance Room, and you might say that this is a reflection of where this congregation began, because all of you students of the history of the Unitarian Universalist congregation at Montclair know that it was begun by a group of women who formed under the name of the Women's Alliance and started the religious education program that then became this congregation a few years later. And this is the Alliance Room. When our Alliance went out of existence a few years back, they took the remaining money that they had and bought this beautiful furniture, not for themselves because they were no longer going to be here, but for those who were going to come after them. And up until that time of their disbandment, they're disbanding. The Women's Alliance was, as a group, responsible for the largest contributions to the congregation of any group through the thrift store that they ran downstairs over in the annex for many decades. You'll see the portraits of Edgar Weirs and Norman Fletcher, portrait of myself by Paul Weingarten. David Lewis is currently working on a portrait that will remain when I have left. I want to draw your attention over here, though, because this is a group of women that when I think of the Women's Alliance, these are many of the women that I think of. And so many of these women have died since I've been here. We still have some of them left, I'm so pleased to say. Pauline Davis is still with us. Jean Nowak is still with us. Phyllis Workinger is still with us. And Elsa New is still with us. And everyone else who's pictured here is gone. This is a picture of Ellen Studiford and Emily Kennedy. Ellen Studiford was the first woman president of our congregation. Emily Kennedy was a president of the congregation some years later than that, and they were very close friends. They lived just a couple of blocks from each other, both of them having died in their homes some years ago. A picture of Nancy Knertzer, who was second generation born in this congregation, died in 2008. She was the president when I came, and I don't know that we're going to be able to go downstairs and look in that space because of the preschool that's down there right now. But Nancy Knertzer grew up as this congregation was growing up. She died at the age of 83 in 2008, and she tells lots of stories, some that would make a minister's hair curl about things that the youth group did, but she talks about how in 1955 the building was sitting on the ground and the congregation elected to excavate in order to have a basement for Sunday school classes, and how for a year they all had great fun when the construction crew wasn't here, going around and crawling around in the basement under the jacks and the pylons and things that were holding the building up. And now, all these decades later, we have that wonderful religious education space that's used during the week as a preschool area, which is a good rental for us, but also an excellent service for the larger community. So here we are in Fletcher Hall. Over the decades, so many things have happened in here. On the stage here, there have been plays. Off and on through the decades, there have been theater groups that have come and gone. We currently have just an excellent theater group. Over the decades, there have been musical performances. This has been the site of many classical to rock to jazz to every conceivable genre of music that has taken place for concert goers in this room. One of my favorite things, besides Sunday coffee hour, the holy sacrament of coffee hour that takes place in this room every week, but beyond that, one of my favorite things that happens in here is wedding receptions. Brides and grooms who are members of the congregation or those who rent our space often will come in and decorate this in such festive ways, and it's just always a joy to be in it when it's like that, and it's wonderful to be in it when it's not like that as well, because it's such beautiful space. One of the things that happens in Fletcher Hall that is, again, a great reflection of this congregation's service to the larger community is that every Wednesday night, this hall is filled with tables, and our Mesh Cafe takes place here. Mesh Cafe is our congregation's participation in the community's Mesh program that feeds people in different houses of worship every night of the week. And so in this room, on any given Wednesday night, we will be feeding between 55 and I think the largest numbers we've gone up to 80 or 85 people that we're serving. We have anywhere from 15 to a couple of dozen volunteers from our congregation who come in and cook the meal in the kitchen and then bring it out and serve it to our guests. And we're talking about intergenerational event, because we have children who are working oftentimes with their parents or with friends that come in, that are part of the cooking, that are part of the serving, that are part of sitting down at the table and visiting with the guests. Our congregation serves more meals in our Mesh Cafe than all of the other sites do put together. This is where the homeless and the hungry of Montclair want to come to be fed, because they are so incredibly welcomed here. It's just a great, wonderful thing. So here at the end of Fletcher Hall is the Melchior Library. It's named for Marguerite and Frederick Melchior, who, by the way, are well known throughout the Unitarian Universalist world. They were Unitarians in their time. It was before the merger, and there's a Melchior Award. The Melchiors were very influential in the national movement of Unitarian, especially of Unitarianism, and so this is our library. It's an honor system library. There's no signing anything out, and I would say that most of what we lend out comes back, and my suspicion is that when things don't come back when they've been lent out, that probably they're passed on to others. So and we have a number of people who give regularly, really excellent texts to the library. So this bulletin board went up a few years ago, and a number of different organizations within the congregation are represented on the bulletin boards on both sides of the hall here. I don't know that I talked about the legislative ministries the other day, and the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministries of New Jersey was formed just a few years ago. Our congregation has been involved since before it was an actual body. We were involved in the structuring of it. I served on the board. Members of our congregation have served and are serving on the board. Former president of our congregation, Craig Hirschberg, is currently the executive director. Nick Lewis, Judy Strachan are currently on the board, members of our congregation that are on the board of UULMNJ. It's the organization of all of the UU congregations within the state of New Jersey in order to take our religious values into the public square, so that there is a voice that affirms and promotes the inherent worth and dignity of every individual that's a part of the political conversation in New Jersey, so that we are in respect of and promote the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part, and so that value is there as a part of the political life of the state of New Jersey, because there's a legislative ministry that this congregation is a part of and supports. I've mentioned the fire a few different times. The roof burned off, and as it was burning, it fell in. And you might notice on the floor here the char marks, and they're throughout, especially this side of the sanctuary. There's some over on the other side too, but you can see them much more distinctly. They're everywhere here, where the timbers fell and burnt some of the floorboards as well. Here's a really good example here. And it's sort of for me, it's a note of history that's just a part of everything. It's one of the reasons why I take such great pains every Christmas Eve at the candlelight service to make sure that everybody knows the proper behavior to use with candles, so that we don't have new char marks on the floor that we might one day, or that future generations might one day celebrate. So there are three things I'd like to talk about a little bit here in the narthex. The first is the Memorial Garden plaque that's over here. The Memorial Garden itself is just right outside of these windows, and here are the names of members of the congregation whose ashes are in that garden. The garden didn't exist until 2000. It might have been 1999 when the garden came into existence. Doris Langsdorff was in 1999. Luella Barclay was the first ashes that went into the garden, and she died in 1997. So that was the inauguration of our memorial garden. And an interesting thing was that when she died, her daughter asked me if the ashes of her two dogs that had been on her mantle for some number of years could go into the same hole in the garden that we were putting Luella's ashes. And so from the very beginning, we've had both human and animals loved by humans ash remains in our garden. Another thing that I would like to point out is our welcoming congregation poster that's here. This is not a very beautiful presentation, but what it represents is a lot of years of self-examination in terms of homophobia and what we need to do in order to be self-aware of our own participation in it, and what we need to do in order to be more welcoming of the gay, lesbian, transgender, and bisexual communities here at home, and what we can do to promote those things in the world around us, and an expression of our being a welcoming congregation with the many years of dedication that this congregation had towards marriage equality. I didn't realize that the Green Sanctuary certificate was over here. This was, we began the process in February of 2001 to become a Green Sanctuary congregation. We were finally made it through all of the process by 2010, and our commitment to sustainability and to being an ecologically responsible congregation has only grown since 2010. So I see that as a movement within the congregation that will continue. We're in the midst of our pledge drive now, and we have this marker up here, but I want to take it away for just a minute because there's a painting on the mantle here that says a great deal, I think, about our congregation. It says that we are welcoming of all seekers after truth, beauty, justice, and compassion. Those were words that we began saying 20 years ago. And when I said them the first time, the way that I said them was that we are welcoming of all seekers after truth, beauty, justice, and compassion, recognizing our diversity of race, age, gender, sexual identity, orientation, and religious background. And Nancy Knutzer, who was the president at that time, said to me shortly after, "Can we do that a little bit differently?" She said, "Do we want to do something more than recognize, something more even than to accept or to tolerate? Can't we celebrate those differences?" And so for 20 years ever since then, we say, celebrating our diversity of race, age, gender, sexual identity, and orientation, religious background, and perspective on life. Nancy also ended that last piece, the perspective on life. One of the challenges during the Capitol campaign was we knew that we needed to light the room better for people. And so coming up with this arrangement for lights and utilizing the area that was already broken up by the tie rods, the designers, David and Karen especially, wanted to minimize the intrusion on the view from up here, and it was sort of impossible. But when most people who are up here are sitting down like this, and sitting down you can easily see under the light racks, and the people down below can see much better as a result of those light racks. When I'm sitting on the chancel or standing on the chancel, sometimes when we're singing, and I look up and I see this grill work in front of the organ pipes, I just get a feeling of being at home. And it's just such a warm, rich feeling that just holds me. And I love being held in that space. So here we are in Unity Gallery. This has been here now for about 2.5 years, created by Karen Freed and David Lewis. And Most typically, the room is filled with works of art. Every February, for the last couple of years, we have included an African American display of some sort or another for Black History Month. And this year we're celebrating Black inventors. And so we have a number of pieces about African American men and women who invented and developed various products and projects that have changed the culture of the country. Inventors. During other times, Unity Gallery is filled with artwork, sometimes from members of our congregation, sometimes from members of the wider community, and it has brought all kinds of people into our facilities to see the various exhibits that have taken place here, and it's been just a wonderful addition to the congregation's life in these last few years. Just passing through. So it almost never fails that when somebody comes into my office for the first time, they look around at all of this beautiful artwork and they say, "Oh, what a great office." And I feel like that every single time I walk into this room. I love my office and I love the artwork. Almost every piece here was something that was given to me by the artist who created it. Back in 1995, this was given to me by a 14-year-old girl who was a member of the congregation, and it was an ink design that she did for Let It Be a Dance, a song that maybe some members of the congregation remember. A piece by David Lewis. This is a piece that was not given to me, but I got to be the custodian of it. This is a watercolor of our facilities that was done by Nat Lewis. This was a collage that was done by Edmund Pease on the occasion of my installation. Paul Weingarten did the piece up above here. Sharon Pitts gave me this as a gift for having done her son's memorial service, a graveside memorial service that took place on September the 12th, 2001. A very difficult day. A piece by Don Traywin, a photograph by Gene Campbell. A gift from the Stockton, Illinois congregation, who gave me this piece from the Book of Ecclesiastes. Some recognitions. This is my fellowship material from the Unitarian Universalist Association. This is a recognition that came out of the New Jersey General Assembly. This is one of my prized possessions here. At first glance it looks like a letter that I've written, and most of it is, but in the hand scrawl up here is the response to the letter that was handwritten by President Jimmy Carter. I did a sermon based on one of his books a few years ago and sent him a copy of it, and he wrote back, "To Rev. Ortman, thank you. It's a fine and much needed sermon. Best wishes, Jimmy C." I have my bicycle helmet on the wall here, and the reason that I have it there is so that people might ask about it when they come into my office. That's the helmet that I was wearing when I went crashing to the ground on my cross-country ride a few years ago, and that helmet saved my life, and I want to tell everybody I have the opportunity, wear a helmet. It can save your life. Different photographs of different moments in time, and just a wonderful space to work and to work with people. I want to talk about the style of ministry that we have shared over the past 20 years a little bit. And the way that I want to talk about that is by saying that, let me start off by putting it in words that I often share with the mentees that I've worked with over the years. And what I always stress to them over and over through our time together is that ministry, when it's done well, is never about the minister, and I think that has been the hallmark of our shared ministry here in Montclair. I think that we've done ministry incredibly well together. The various presidents of the congregation and I have felt like partners in work. I felt like partners with the board over the years. I feel like we have an understanding of the terrain that that we are responsible for, and I understand that that my part of that is to be. This is a phrase I just heard this morning: the spiritual custodian of the congregation, and it's the board's task to make sure that the structures, in their many forms, from physical to financial to the relationships among the congregants, are solid. And so together we've created year-round worship services. Together we've created the small group ministries. We've created the visiting chaplains group. Together we've created a membership committee finally that really looks at how we bring people into the congregation and how we maintain the structures that allow people to be connected here. And that all sounds like very general work, and in a lot of ways it is. And so it's real hard to put your hand on a particular piece and say, this is why it's worked well. There are so many pieces for why we have enjoyed such a wonderful tenure together, so my hope is that the new search committee will do diligent work and find the minister who will continue to serve this congregation in ways that allows this congregation to continue to become itself in ever more meaningful ways. So a way that I would want to put all of what we've been talking about into the larger context of Unitarian Universalism and where it is today is to say that is to start really with the traditional aspects of both of those traditions, of both of those faith communities. So that, from Earl Morse Wilbur, we have the three major characteristics of Unitarianism that have existed before the movement became Unitarian, and that is freedom of conscience, religious tolerance, and the application of reason. So those have been a part of Unitarianism since before it was Unitarian. And then from the historian Charles Howe, on the Universalist side of things, we have this incredibly hopeful, optimistic faith tradition that says that we are all saved in the end. And so it's incumbent upon us to behave with one another with that as the base, that we are all saved. And so the way that comes into play today is, our Unitarian Universalist movement, based in those very characteristics, was incredibly involved in the marriage equality movement and continues to be. I mean, we talk about it in past tense here in New Jersey because we've achieved it. There's still a lot of states out there where it has yet to be achieved, and Unitarian Universalists are actively engaged in those states, and they need to continue to be. This year, we've had the Trayvon Martin case, we've had the Michael Brown case, we've had the Eric Garner case, and so many other cases where African American men are being killed by civilians and police in ways that their killers are being held totally unaccountable, and the systems are being totally left unaccountable for those murders. And Unitarian Universalists are taking to the streets once again, because that's where we go when society needs to be reminded that things are askew. That's where we go, and we're back in the streets again. We were there, in the Vietnam War. We've been there through the first Iraq War, through the second Iraq War, and we continue. And now we're there because racial injustice is once again something that has become intolerable, and so we're there. Where we need to go even more is in the area of the environment. Yes, there's a great deal of activism within Unitarian Universalism in regard to the environment, but there needs to be a great deal more, and I think that we need to take to the streets to say to our larger culture, we are spending our grandchildren's, our great-grandchildren's inheritance in ways that can never be made up. And we have to change the way that we are in the world. We have to change the way that we relate to the world, by the way that we relate to one another and the world. This is all about oppression. This is all about justice. And in the end, it's about having an environment. And Unitarian Universalism needs to, more than we have, step up to that plate.